I have the honor, the pleasure to introduce to some of you and to reintroduce to others the keynote speaker, Joyce Tavon, Chief Executive Officer of Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance, MHSA. Joyce Tavon has dedicated her career of 30+ years to the mission of reducing and ending homelessness, especially through housing solutions. She brings a background in planning, program development, public policy, and systems change. Joyce returned to MHSA in 2018 in senior leadership and assumed the role of CEO in the spring of 2023. She previously worked at MHSA when it was first formed, leaving to become a founding executive director of Homestar. Other prior experience includes leadership roles with Father Bills and Mainspring and the South Shore Network to End Homelessness, as well as years of consulting in fundraising, technical assistance, strategy, and assisting communities with their HUD continuum of care planning and applications for funding. Let's welcome Joyce Tavon.
Thank you, LaTanya, and gosh, it's great both to be here and to follow Nemo giving that really powerful human side of the story. My very own State Senator Pat Jalen, kind of the systems picture, and Rep. Stanley, the perspective from the State House. So as Nemo had and LaTanya have both shared a little, I'm going to try to build on this regarding first about MHSA and who we are. So as you heard, my work and MHSA's work is around focused on solutions to homelessness. And we are a statewide alliance and really want to emphasize that. Hearth is a key member. Proud to say LaTanya is a member of our member advisory board, made up of about 15 leaders across the state. And we bring together about 100 community organizations from around the state, all focused on how are we addressing and ending homelessness. And it's really important to us who are doing the kind of advocacy and policy work to hear directly from those on the front lines, like the leadership at Hearth, who are actually running shelters and day programs and providing housing and all the rest. And I guess real quickly, big buckets of what we do: we advocate, we engage, convene, and we're always looking to innovate. And as we do this work, we're also very guided by what is the data telling us. So I say this with hesitation because there are some key researchers in the room and on the Hearth board. But we all know that as our overall population is aging, the data is also telling us, as Senator Jalen pointed out, that the fastest growing group experiencing homelessness are older adults. And I know Jennifer Malinsky from your board spent time talking about all of this, and Jennifer, you can kind of correct me my data later. I think, though, there's agreement on some of the key big points around this, that there are a couple of trends going on here. First, there is the aging of those who are chronically homeless. And that, as we have this ongoing, shortage of housing and access for people who have fewer resources, we are seeing people who already had behavioral health issues and all, and they're remaining homeless longer, and now they're aging with all those complications. And now there is this newer trend, and that is the growth of older adults who for the first time are experiencing homelessness after age 50. And I think Senator Jalen hit on it. all of the systems issues that are leading to this. So why is it we have people who have worked their whole adult lives, often home health aides and all the other work that is so vital to our society, and now what happens, death or divorce, spouse, loss of a job, or simply now they're on fixed incomes and they're trying to survive in a market where housing is becoming more and more expensive. And so we are seeing a group of people who we had not seen before, who are showing up at homeless shelters or quietly in their cars. I don't need to tell you this, the staff at Hearth can tell you, I'm sure, the phone calls they're getting all the time about this group. There's a third group I also want to flag. So all of this comes from the national report that was done a few years ago when we had a very different administration in Washington that was pulling together and looking at the data. And they flagged as well that what we are seeing is the aging of adults in what we all know to be supportive housing, deeply affordable housing with those wraparound services, which is what Hearth provides. So we're seeing that not only in housing operated by places like Hearth that set out to do this very important work, we're seeing it across the board in supportive housing. So across our state, we have kind of roughly 10,000 units of what we consider supportive housing for those who had once been homeless, typically have other disabilities. And within that, because in a moment I'm going to, if you don't mind, just go back for 1 second. You'll see in the lower right, just want to flag, so I'm going to talk about this just a little bit more. What we've known as the HUD Continuum of Care's key federal resource that has for years funded a lot of our supportive housing. And I'll come back to this. Really rough data that has come from all of the providers across the state suggests a pretty significant number of the people, the percentage of those in that housing are older adults. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So what the next slide is showing you is a little about a crisis we have right now that has been brought to us by our administration in Washington. This is not caused by any cut by Congress. The funding is there. It is caused by a shift, I guess an ideological shift, in where this administration wants to focus resources. So I'll tell you what this means in a minute, but for 25 years, there was bipartisan support that our federal housing agency, HUD, Housing Urban Development, should use the resources within its kind of homeless response arm. And inadequate those resources were. But there was agreement that HUD is a federal housing agency, the dollars should go towards housing. And there was also agreement that the data had shown us that the best way to respond when people have been homeless a long time and have complex conditions is housing, care and services, which is what Hearth is in the business of doing, supportive housing, that this is the vital approach. So now, new administration says, homelessness is on the rise. What a crisis we have. And their response is, let's take that small amount of money, $3.6 billion nationally, that was being spent to keep people, get people and keep them housed, and let's just shift it into short-term services. So this is a map that is just telling us a little, like, what does this mean for Massachusetts? And my organization's role in this is to help us understand the dollars, and I won't go into all the details, the dollars come to this state to 11 different regional entities. Boston's pretty clear, it's Boston, but around the state there are different ones. And the impact and importance of that money wasn't always clear because it's going to these 11 entities. So as this crisis hit about a year ago, when HUD said, we want to change how we do things, an organization, MHSA, started to look at this data and said, hey, we realize $91 million is coming into this state every year that is essentially funding the rent for people. They're not homeless now, they used to be homeless. And they also typically have complex disabling conditions. And as I kind of flagged earlier, we now understand probably roughly 37% of them are older. So I just want to take a moment, because I'm here showing you numbers, and take a moment to reflect on Nemo had talked about earlier, and that woman who had been homeless such a long time, and when she first moved into housing and was sleeping on the couch in the common area, because that behind every one of these numbers, I'm here to talk, our group, we talk about the data and the numbers and 3,800 units at risk, but I don't need to tell you, there is a human story. And as a colleague from one of the other organizations said, as we now are figuring out what to do now that these funds are at risk, and she said, like, these people aren't, they're not potted plants that you can just kind of move. People have stabilized, they've settled in, and they've thrived. I won't take us through all of the details, but essentially HUD has a fair amount of leeway around this particular money. It is different from Section 8 or public housing. It is an arm within HUD that is able to do an annual competition. So they have a fair amount of leeway to shift how they want to use the dollars. Not quite as much leeway as they think, so there is, court cases right now and litigation going on. But it is, of course, it's also creating a lot of instability in the field, and it is hard for all of us who do this work and care so deeply and devoted our lives to how are we adding and creating solutions to now find ourselves in rooms figuring out lifeboat strategies. And then also, and Nemo touched on this as well, when we add to this HUD kind of crisis, also what is happening with Medicaid and the impact that's going to have across the board, but very much so for older adults. And Medicaid is not solely just the health service that someone gets when they go to their doctor. Medicaid also is a foundational support that pays for a lot of intensive day services and support services in supportive housing. So I've hit you with a lot of grim news. That seems to be what I do these days when I go out to events. So what are we doing about it? Let me flag 3 things that we're doing right now on these federal threats. I mean, one is just this elevating the importance of this resource, because it's kind of a small piece within a very big federal budget, kind of has flying under the radar. And really, to our state administration, legislation, to have them understand how vital these resources are. And then, of course, suddenly, in the last year, we had to do a very big pivot and give a lot of our attention to federal advocacy. Secondly, we have been digging in and working with our state's housing agency around the contingency planning. We know the state is not going to come up with $91 million, happily take it, to fill this gap. So we are working with them on every possible resource and strategy that we can use. And then third, we are also at the same time tracking what are the changes and impact of Medicaid for people who are experiencing homelessness and those in supportive housing. And thinking about, as an alliance, how we need to train folks in our sector to understand this and make sure we hold on to these vital resources. An additional comment, though, about how all of this intersects with older adults. I mean, we see it in the percentages I flagged. that a lot of older adults are in this housing. Additionally, before we were hit with this crisis, for MHSA, we had really started to prioritize more attention to this phenomenon of rising older adult homelessness, and we're beginning to partner with the kind of sector that provides general older adult services, aging services, and the homeless sector, and how do we kind of connect those two better so they understand one another and we improve our resources. And we are, I will confess that this last year we've all been kind of hit with whiplash and forced to give a lot more attention to the federal crisis, but we also recognize we have to keep our eye as well on the aging of our population, and those experiencing homelessness and supportive housing, and the solutions. So a final message, we should give you some hope and call to action. I think it's, at this time, it is now more important than ever that we're working together, that we're working in partnership. It's going to be, I think, at the local and state level that we're going to be continuing to look for both the immediate, how we get out of this crisis, and where can we start to do some things differently, and reimagine how we are going to fund housing and services and solutions. And I urge all of you, continue to support Hearth. You know, they're an important partner in this work, and continue to stay engaged, because we're all going to need to take part in moving this forward and not letting the folks in Washington define this for us. So, thank you.